What is a hero? A mythological figure, often of divine descent, endowed with great strength or ability? An illustrious warrior? No. It's a person admired for achievements and noble qualities, one who shows great courage. Welcome to the What's a Hero podcast, where we dive deep into what a hero is and what makes them that hero. I'm your host, Ken Frownfelter, and I'm going to be introducing you to some of the world's most likely and unlikely heroes. You may have never heard of them before, and they most likely have never met you. But they all have one thing in common. They are ready to do whatever it takes to help make you better, even if it means sacrificing everything for you. Let's get into it.
This is episode 65 of the What's a Hero podcast with me, Ken Frownfelter. Don't fight the people you love. Trying times can bring out an ugly side in anyone. But when we encounter these types of challenges in life, it's best to stand beside those closest to us rather than against them. In the 1948 film Red River, John Wayne plays Thomas Dunson, a headstrong cattle rancher who adopts an orphan boy named Matthew Garth. After starting out with nothing but a bull and Garth's cow, Dunson eventually manages to assemble a successful cattle ranch, which requires him to hire more men. But when financial issues and other hardships arise, Dunson becomes increasingly tyrannical, causing Garth to reach his breaking point and rebel with some of the ranch hands. Dunson is enraged and vows to make Garth pay with his life. When the two finally encounter each other, they come to blows until Tess, Garth's love interest, interferes by firing a gun several times and demanding the two come to their senses and stop fighting. The men reconcile, and Dunson later encourages Garth to marry Tess before adding his initials to the ranch's brand, as he had promised to do years prior. When it comes to family, set the fisticuffs aside. Instead, work together to fight the challenges life throws your way, even when those challenges come from the people you love. And I read this story today because we have to understand that the way we treat people, how we treat people, comes from something within inside of us. It's not something that we expect or is expected of us. It's the way we treat people. It has to come from inside of us. And if you love someone, if you care for people, you need to treat them right. Additionally, if you work with people, if you want to have any kind of positive influence, and influence can be thought of in 100 different ways. However, if you want to have any kind of relationship with people, you have to have a relationship with people. Now, and I'm talking about a positive one. So if you are looked at as somebody who treats people poorly and isn't fair with people, you're going to be remembered as somebody, or even maybe not even remembered as somebody who did that to them. They're not going to remember you specifically. They're going to remember how you treated them. And what we need to remember in life is that the way that we treat those people closest to us has to come from more than just emotion. We can't just run off of emotion and say, hey, well, I feel this way today, and start treating people like garbage. What we need to do is we need to focus on helping each other, no matter how we're feeling, remembering our relationship with these people and say, hey, I'm not happy with the way that you're doing whatever. We need to talk about it. And then you talk about it. You work it out as a family or as a friend or as a coworker or whatever the case is. But you don't just fly off the handle and treat people like garbage. And the reason I'm telling this story today is for, I guess there is a way that I can connect it to today's guest, who is a guy who has done a ton of things with his life. He's been a local cop and a federal agent. He spent 4 decades in law enforcement conducting behavioral threat assessments of individuals considering targeted violence. He started his career with the Little Rock Police Department and retired from the U.S. Secret Service as a special agent after 25 years. He was noted for his interpersonal skills while assigned as a liaison with the FBI, CIA, and local agencies. And he was an adjunct instructor at St. Leo University and the Alpha Group. But the one thing that he is always known for was with how he dealt with people, how he treated people, and that people loved working with him. So that's what I'm talking about, because he treated people right. And so that's something that we got to try to remember. That's what we try to, the kind of lesson of today's podcast is how you treat people. And you'll know how you're treating people, because you're going to be getting something in return, whether it's the way they treat you back. And then now we have to understand there's people out there that are jerks. Sure. However, when people treat you a certain way, you got to look at the way that you're treating them. And is it reciprocated in kind, or is there something else going on? Most of the time, the way you treat people is they're going to notice it and they're going to reciprocate in kind. So if you are one of those people who are encouraging and uplifting and everything else, like today's guest, we will be able to, you'll be able to know who you are. So nevertheless, this gentleman is also the author of a book called Mass Killers. And I'm deeply honored to have Mr. Mike Roach on the What's Your podcast today. How are you, sir?
I'm doing wonderful, Ken. Thank you. Again, it's I appreciate that intro, and I'm humbled by the invitation and honored to be on here. I've heard your previous guests, and I don't really consider myself a hero, just a regular grunt that's, had a great career. So
right, and I think a lot of people do look at themselves like that, and that's good, because if everybody walked around looking at themselves like, well, I'm a hero around here, they'd walk in a room with their hands on their hips like Superman. And I'll tell you right now, a lot of us don't look good in tights. So it's probably best.
Or a cape.
Right. Right. And it's better to wear your underwear under your clothes instead of on the outside. So.
Isn't that the truth?
Yeah. So, but no, and that's exactly right. And that's why I think it's you are, in fact, and I can say this to you, it's just different if you were to say it about yourself. We're like, wow, this guy's full of himself. But when you see somebody else that sits there and say, hey, no, I think you are. I think you've checked every box that would indicate what a hero is. Somebody that's willing to serve other people and sacrifice time and their life and effort and everything else to help people be better. I think that makes a big difference. And I think that's what helps epitomizes a person as a hero.
Well, and like your intro, it was spot on, is how you treat people.
Right.
And 99% of the people, if you get out there, and I learned this as a young patrol officer, and I had a great FTO, Jack Matlock, who one time, I remember getting out on a traffic stop, and he said, just keep in mind, Michael, he said, that when you're dealing with these people, this may be the only time that they've never dealt with a police officer before. Mm-hmm. And this is their one time, and you're truly an ambassador of the uniform and the badge, and right, and how you treat people. And, it was really, I considered that, that mentorship that he was providing. And, and I did. From that point forward, I always made sure that I tried to treat people with respect, and almost always it was reciprocated. Now that there were a few times when that didn't happen, but I truly believe in the golden rule that you treat people the way that you would like to be treated in the same way.
Right. So you just talked about when you were younger. Let's go back even further than that. Who was
that? That's a long time ago too.
Who was little Mikey? Where did he grow up? What did he do? What was his thing?
Yeah, so little Mikey grew up on Long Island, and kind of a working class environment. It was a good home. I had a great mother and father, and I was the baby of the family by a considerable amount. Initially, I wanted to be an astronaut. Mm-hmm. That was like 1968, 69 when we had the moon landing and the right, Apollo project and all that. So it was like, oh, that's what I want to do. And then I quickly realized that I had difficulty counting up past my fingers and my toes. So what I would refer to as my Arkansas calculator. Okay. And so, math wasn't my strong suit. It still is not. I have to rely on my wife to figure out the tip for the server. And and science certainly not either. And probably around the 7th grade, I came to the realization that, I probably needed to look at something besides being an astronaut. And, at that time, I started reading, Joseph Wambaugh, Adam 12 was on, the original Police Story, which was a great show. And, I was just became enamored with that. And, that became my goal at that point was, I wanted to become a cop.
About what age was that?
So I would have been in the 7th grade, whatever that is, like, 13, something like that.
All right. Yeah. So you just really started, and everything was kind of gearing towards that.
Yes, it was. Yeah.
Right?
Even in high school, they had like a career day, and I signed up, and they had the police department came out and took us on like a ride along. It wasn't actually on patrol, but they took you to the police department and showed you around. So I mean, I was geared towards that from the very beginning. And then when I went off to the college, then I decided that was again what I wanted to do. Now I grew up in on Long Island, and at that time I lived in Suffolk County, which was probably the highest and may still be the highest paid police department in the country.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but to get hired there was like next to impossible. And at that time, this was in the early 70s, you had to be a veteran in order to have the veteran's preference to take the test. So,
oh, wow.
Like I had a friend that scored like a 98 on the test, and just couldn't get hired because all the veterans coming in, especially those out of Vietnam, we're getting their 5 or 10 points preference, and that's who was getting hired. And in at that same time, you had in New York City, things were collapsing, especially financially, and the city was on the verge of bankruptcy. I had wanted to go to John Day School, which was part of the CCNY program, and they were on the verge of losing their accreditation. So, I mean, there was a lot of problems. It was called Fear City. Crime is, kind of like it is today. Kind of history repeats itself, although, financially it was worse off during that time frame. So with the encouragement of my dad, I decided to head south. I had a brother that was living in Little Rock at that time. And he was working and had been transferred there, working for a drugstore chain. And so I got on the Jersey Turnpike and headed south, and landed up in Little Rock, Arkansas.
And was that a big, I guess, coming from Long Island, was it a big difference back then? I mean, was there a big culture shock going on?
Yeah, I mean, to a certain degree. I mean, obviously it was, quieter. And every time I opened my mouth, especially like once I got into the police department, and you'd key up the mic and it'd say 10th floor,
Yeah.
and you'd have that so and I've lost that over the years, but so everybody else had the Southern drawl, and I kind of stuck out, but some people found that, gee, that's kind of different, and so it was a bit of a change there. It was more of a culturally diverse city. It was also Little Rock itself. A lot of times people think, well, it's kind of a small, southern, sleepy city, but it's actually a pretty violent city. And in fact, just a couple of years ago, when they were still less than 200,000 population, they were the most violent small city in America. So,
wow.
And yeah, even when I was there, it was, we would per capita rank in, the top 10 in violent cities. So it was a good place to learn how to be a cop.
Yeah. You got to learn what's that? Learn by drowning, or learn by immersion.
Drink from a fire hose.
Exactly. So while you were in school the whole time, was that the focus that I said, I'm going to be a cop and that's just what I'm going to do? Guys were thinking about becoming engineers or astronauts or whatever they were going to look at doing, or was that a thing? I mean, did you just, I'm gonna get through school, I'm gonna keep playing whatever ball or whatever it is, and then when I get out, I'll figure it out? Or
Yeah, no, I mean, that was my focus was, I wanted to be a cop. That was all that was to it. And, I had no other, cops in the family. I was going to be the first. And, I criminal justice was what my major was in college. And I worked at a drugstore in Little Rock. That was kind of in a lower socioeconomic neighborhood, and a lot of shoplifting. So they employed off-duty cops in there. So I was always hanging out with them and talking with them, and that they were again encouraging me to, once I turned 21, to apply to the police department.
Yeah, that's cool. So you moved there right after school, then moved to Little Rock.
Correct.
Right
Yes.
School.
Yeah. Right.
And so within that time of graduating school, did you go to college in Little Rock, or?
I did. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. University of Arkansas at Little Rock. So.
And then you finished school and then figured I'm ready to take this test, or?
Yeah, so I didn't even finish at that point. I hadn't finished college, because I was working at the same time. So I was kind of, taking anywhere from 9 to 12 hours, a semester, and I'm paying my way through college as I was going through.
Right.
And so then. When I turned 21, I looked at applying to Little Rock, and I had also sent off to other police departments. And I remember, like the Houston Police Department, for example, at that time, I sent off, said, "Hey, I'd like to have some information." This is before the internet, so you'd have to send a letter.
Right. And they actually get a sense of you because you had to handwrite it too. It's not,
and lick a stamp and send it off. And a couple of weeks later, here comes a package. And Houston said, "Hey, if you can fill this application in and get it into us by such and such a date, then we can get you into the next academy class starting on that's how desperate they were."
Wow.
But anyway, Little Rock picked me up. I took the test for Little Rock, and that they hired me. And that was in 1979.
And was there a lot of competition for a small number of positions, or was it like we're trying to get anybody we can?
I don't know. I remember that there were a fair number of people that took the test. I wasn't familiar with that at that time, how many people were going to get through. The department at that time was around 320 officers. I don't know what they are now, 500 or 600 now, but at that time it was about 320.
Wow. And so, obviously that's not the same as NYPD, or I guess Suffolk County, like you were saying. Were they bigger? Or were they about the same? Or?
Yeah, so Suffolk County is, again, a huge department, and obviously NYPD has got 35,000 cops,
right?
And you would have 1,000 people showing up to take the test for their exams. Where Little Rock, I don't even remember now. 25 people, maybe. I don't remember now.
Wow. Yeah, because I've talked to folks on here, and we were talking about standing room only when you go to take your test, and this is 80s and 90s, late 80s and 90s and stuff that we're talking about it. But the standing room only. They had to rent out high school gym, a local high school gym, and then they have all the lunch tables filled up. People are taking the test, but then there's also standing room only. People are sitting on the floor doing their test, on the floor and stuff like that for, so there's 150, 200 people there for 3 positions or 5 positions or something,
Yeah.
And so there's that point where you have a defeating thought in your head. Like, how am I going to, am I the cream that's going to rise to the top of this batch of people in here, and when you go home and you either passed the test, you feel really good about yourself, or you didn't pass the test, or you saw somebody when when you're there and they say, okay, this person is going to move on this, and sorry, if you haven't, we didn't call your name. Thanks. Have a, try again later. And then you see these people walking out, like, I could have swore that person was going to win, is going to dominate this, just the way they were talking or whatever. And, it's surprising. And did they have, was it like that at all? Or was there Just everybody was just as unsure of what was happening as the next guy.
Yeah, I think, I don't, my recollection of it is that I didn't consider, or, I'm sure I kind of looked around and saw, some of the other people and thought, am I better than them or not?
Right.
I do remember when I took, fast forward years later, when I went to the Secret Service, that then I thought for sure I had failed the test.
Yeah.
But in this instance, I felt comfortable enough that, or confident enough that I had passed the test. And then there was a psychological exam, and then you had to go in for oral interviews with, like 3 or 4 of the command staff. And,
Right.
And again, I felt, pretty comfortable there as well.
That's cool.
Yeah.
So you get in and you get accepted by Little Rock.
Yeah.
And was it everything you thought it would be, and you were hitting the ground running?
Yeah, no, I mean, I hated to see my days off come up. I mean,
Yeah.
It was like, I'm living the dream now. And truly, when they said, hey, tomorrow is your off day, it was like, I would have done it for free.
Can I come in and do something?
Yeah. I mean, I truly, I loved the job, and I thoroughly enjoyed working patrol. And, obviously, as you progress through the career, then, there's some changes that take place. And, I was working a very busy kind of inner city area. So it was very active, and, I was working the evening shift. So, as soon as you got 10-8, you were taking calls, and,
Right.
And it went that way until you went 10-7, so, it was good. I enjoyed it. Now, there were other times during my patrol period where, I remember we had annexed an area that was very rural, and I was sent out there, and they said, hey, this is so far out that we're going to assign you, a senior officer to be with you. And, and it was just miserable. There was times you'd go through an entire shift and not get a call. And, it was like,
Okay.
you just,
I've worked in a rural department before. Yeah. And it was exactly that way.
Yeah.
You go through an entire day and you're like, holy cow, am I spinning my wheels? Am I going anywhere? Am I doing anything with my life? Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, I always preferred to be busy, and it made the shift go by faster. And,
Yeah. So you go through that, and you go through this whole time and you're not married, no kids, anything like that, right?
Yeah. I got married 3 years later.
Okay.
Yeah.
But you started out your career single guy,
right?
Nothing holding you back. You can work all the overtime you wanted to. You could, you didn't have
all the off-duty jobs.
Yeah. Hardly any expenditures. No overhead and all that stuff like that. And so, and then you said 3 years. And usually, if I'm not mistaken, it takes about that much time to really get your head screwed on tight.
Yes.
In the police world, to figure out, okay, I have an idea what I'm doing. Do I know everything? No. Have I seen everything? No. But I have a very good grasp on police work. Right. Did you see that similar kind of thing for yourself?
Yeah, no, I agree. And I always said it took 5 years, but that they made me an FTO after 3 years. And, so here I have, rookies riding with me after, 3 years on the department.
Right.
And then, I met my wife, and then we took off from there as well.
Now, what was during this period? Usually this is the point where you kind of learn a little bit about yourself, how you either interact with people or by things that they do. And it kind of, you reflects and you start having some introspection. What was one or two of the things that kind of got you to start seeing yourself as who you are, learning lessons that you said, wow, that I've changed, and you can look back and see the change specifically in yourself?
Yeah. So, I guess, I've always been one to kind of assess my life as I progressed along.
Mhm.
and to evaluate where I am and what I've done. I think, as a kid coming into police work, I was pretty naive. I grew up
Right.
again
Yes.
in a middle class, neighborhood, and now I was thrown into, an environment that, I don't think most people are anticipating. I mean, you can watch as much Adam 12 as you want, and
Yeah.
it's just until you actually live it.
Mhm.
And I think it was kind of, to me surprising, sometimes the violence out there, the human suffrage, going into these, disturbance calls and seeing the way some people live.
Yeah.
And then you think, how do their children have any chance in life, living in this kind of environment,
Right. Right.
and so I think, in some ways you become a little bit more cynical
Yeah.
and more callous as you're going along, and realize that not everything is unicorns and rainbows, and that there is a lot of evil and violence out there.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's kind of weird because it's like you said, you were raised in a family where everybody, yeah, you had your disagreements, but pretty much everybody got along. You were able to communicate with your parents, and you saw some kind of, okay, I can focus on doing this because I don't have to worry about XYZ. With, like you said, there's kids who are living in squalor, and the parents,
Yes.
because they don't know any better. Kids don't know any better, but their parents do, and they don't care. And the kids don't know that there's another option. They don't know that there's something more out there for them that they can be doing. And then you explain something to the parents. You might even explain to them, hey, you can do this, or this is another option, and they have no idea. And then you try to figure out, how have you gotten this far in life? And you realize, oh, they were those kids just 30 years ago. They were those little kids, and
Yeah,
they didn't know anything. They never saw it. And it's absolutely generational, some of the stuff that we do see. And it's frustrating and hard to deal with.
Yeah, I remember at one time getting a call to an animal inside a house.
Uh-huh.
And so it turned out that these people had a hole in their floor, and a possum had crawled up through the hole in the floor and had gotten in behind the refrigerator. And she was going on, like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this thing has been in here all day, and blah, blah, blah. And meanwhile, I'm looking at an infestation of roaches running around the floor, and she's like nonchalantly crushing them with her toe. And that they're like, they're running across my boots. I mean, it's just like the worst thing I've ever seen. And I thought, and she's worried about this possum behind the refrigerator. And she said, oh my gosh, my poor children had to, and I was like, well, what about the roaches? I mean,
Did you ask her that?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
And she says, oh yeah, I've talked to the landlord, and but it was just kind of, that was her existence, and she had grown to accept that.
Right. And it's amazing what, as humans, we're willing to accept or just be comfortable being in. And it's odd. And, it's part of one of those things that she just never saw. She never saw that as, because she's focused on something else, whether it's trying to find food for the kids or whatever.
Right.
That cleanliness is not a priority, or something along those lines. It's kind of weird. But so you go through this, you meet your wife, and I'm assuming she's supportive of you being a police officer, or else she would have married a police officer.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Like a lot of cops, she was in nursing school at the time. So she became a nurse, and
a stereotype. Here we go.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, cops always land up with, teachers or nurses, and so she was in school at that time, and we had bumped into each other a couple of times, and finally, I followed her into the student union, and there was another officer that was sitting there, and she actually sat down in the same booth. And he was with a different department, but she worked at a restaurant where it was down the street from that department. So they had a lot of the officers would come in, and so she knew them. And so anyway, it turned out she lived like 2 buildings away from me in the same apartment complex, and we hit it off. And 6 weeks later, we were engaged, and 7 months later, we were married, and we just had our 40th wedding anniversary.
Nice. So it obviously was working.
It is.
Or you guys don't want to talk about stuff.
Yeah, no, I give her credit for, being very supportive, and she was always my therapist. And I said, we were kind of like 2 puzzle pieces that just fit perfectly together to form a picture. And I have to give her all the props in the world for everything that she's done.
Yeah. And it isn't that's amazing that you can find that person who meshes with you so well. And then when you are having a rough time, or they're having a rough time, and you're able to, and I would assume, and I know nurses see a bunch of garbage, they see a lot of crap that comes in and that sort of thing, but they don't necessarily have to take the chance of everything they go to. There's an opportunity for them to die, or them have to kill somebody, which is, it's just, there's stuff that weighs heavy on cops. But when you see those heavy things, you're able to springboard off of her, and that she's willing to, okay, let's see what we can do. And she's willing to work with you on that, as opposed to, having no idea what you're talking about, and just, that's your thing. You don't need to talk to me about that. But having that support system, knowing that she cares about you enough and so much that she's willing to stick with you and say, okay, let's work through these whatever issues by the numbers. And that's a big thing. That's a big thing to be able to, brag about and have.
Yeah. No, to me, it was critical. I was always able to kind of compartmentalize what happened at work. And, and years later, if, I was working for bosses that I didn't like, for example, I knew that, hey, I had a safe harbor to go to. And that was my sanctuary. And, when I walked through that door, I knew that, hey, I was going to be met by her, and, life was good for that period of time.
Right. Yeah. I look at my wife as my hub. If let's say I go away to do something, whether I have to go out for training or I go out of town or whatever, and I do something, I'm like, oh, I wish they were here. And I just want to get back and tell them about it. And, put my life into them, and then have them be able to experience it, at least by story or whatever. But you think back, okay, if that person was here, I need to tell them about this, or whatever the case is. And having that, and a lot of people don't have that. Having
That's
that
correct.
That's a big thing. That's a big, like you said, puzzle piece.
Yeah. And I was just always made that a primary focus in my life. I loved my job and my career, but, I always knew that, when you finally get to the finish line, that it's your family that's going to be there to greet you, and they're the ones that are going to judge you for what you've done by them for the previous 25, 35, 40 years, whatever it may be. Yes.
Right. Yeah. Because, and we were talking before the show here, we were talking about Randy Sutton, how I had him on previous podcast. And one of the things that he mentioned was his legacy. He wants to leave a good legacy. And I explained to him that I had heard a guy talk one time, and he said that your legacy is, and there's three ways that you're going to be left, you're going to be remembered. And those 3 things are, people are going to say, man, I'm glad that guy's gone. 2, the other one is they're going to say, man, I sure do miss that guy. I wish he was still here. And the third is, who are you talking about?
I remember you saying that.
And you don't want to be any one of those. I mean, you want to be one of those, which is I sure wish that guy was still here.
Right. You
don't want to be the who, especially, because what have you left? What have you done with your life? If people are so, and I remember doing that. I at one point, I reached out to somebody, I think it was on Facebook or something like that, friend request, and somebody says, "Oh yeah, hey, do we know each other?" I said, yeah, we were friends in high school.
Mm-hmm.
We did stuff. We played sports together. We were in the same classes together. We hung out after school together. Oh, okay. I think I remember you. How do you not remember? So
Actually, a small world story. I bumped into an old high school chum of mine at 9/11 at Ground Zero.
Uh-huh.
And I hadn't seen him in 25 years. And to be honest, I didn't recognize him. And, when he came up to me and I said, "Who are you?" And he told me, and I said, "Oh my gosh. Yeah." I mean, that immediately clicked.
Right.
And, we knew each other, but we hadn't seen each other in, like I said, 25 years. But, going back to what you were saying, I use an analogy of the 4th and 1 club. When it's 4th down and 1 yard to go, who is the boss is looking to give something to? That dependable person that they know is going to get the job done. And so you've got those people, but unfortunately in law enforcement and probably even in the private sector, that those people tend to get burned out because the bosses are always going to those same people. It's the path of least resistance. And then you've got your spectators that are sitting back. Sometimes, some of them are team players that they're willing to come out on a search warrant or, provide assistance on surveillances. But, you never hear them briefing for cases or anything. It's
right.
making the arrests.
Doing a training or something.
And then you've got others that never even leave the locker room, that are just, you can never find them. They're always hiding,
they get
it's kind of the same way that you were talking about.
They're really good at collecting a paycheck. And so, but that's
like a George Costanza in Seinfeld.
And I've got a friend on the other side of that we hadn't seen each other, and I've talked about him all the time. I've had him on the show before, John Hartle, and we were best friends through our whole childhood until we were about 10 years old, 11 maybe, and hadn't heard from him 35 years. Just out of the blue, I get contacted by his wife, and she says, "Hey, wanting to find out if I'm the same kid, same guy." And then when we saw each other, it was just like, we were able to just mesh right back, and it's just amazing the people that you have in your life because of who you are and what you do and the character that you exude, and there's a remnant of the character that you have at, let's say, 10 years old. That character is still there. That person is still there. It's just how people do change. I get that, but how much have you changed? Or are you so honest and true to yourself that, what, I am who I am, and I'm maybe more mature, maybe have some more scars or have some more, I've done some things, put on some weight, whatever, but I'm going to be the same person character wise, that there's that intrinsic detail value that I was when I was a 10-year-old or 15-year-old or whatever the case is.
Right.
So you're going through this whole time as you're going through police work as the rookie, and then you meet and marry your wife, and she's supportive of you. And Little Rock were you thinking, this is my be all, I'm going to be here and I'm going to continue to just I'm going to retire here at Little Rock, or something else come up?
Yeah, so I mean that was the initial plans. We had made our home. She was working at Children's Hospital, and I was at the police department. And I had gone to street crimes. I had worked a year and a half in street crimes, and I went back to patrol. To me, I always loved patrol. Patrol was, where I enjoyed, a front row seat,
right,
to the greatest show on earth, basically. But at some point, one of my sergeants came to me and said, "Hey, have you ever considered being a detective?" And I said, "No, not really." And he says, "Well, I think, you have the the analytical skills, and I think you would do well. So anyway, I became a detective. Initially, I didn't really care for it. I was like, I wish I was back in patrol, but eventually I was assigned to financial crimes, and but eventually, I found my niche and I enjoyed doing that. And then the retirement system I looked at was becoming somewhat perilous, I would call it. And what had happened was they had, through some politics within the state, they had decided that they were going to start all the new hires under the state retirement system. And I said, well, it doesn't take, a rocket scientist to figure that you've got this shrinking contributing base, and at some point more money is going to be going out than coming in.
Right.
And so I said, the last thing I want to be is, 65 years old, shuffling out to the mailbox in my pajamas and bathrobe there, and get the notice that the retirement system is bankrupt. And, and people say, and people say, oh, that can't happen. And I said, well, talk to some of the, the steel workers. And, I mean, it's happened in the past. So at that point, I had finally had my degree. I always said I was on like the decade plan, and it took me 10 years to finally get my degree.
I'm with you.
So at that point I decided to start looking around at the federal agencies, and I was working a lot with the Secret Service, so I applied to them. I also applied to ATF, and ATF hired me first.
So you and that was solely because of retirement and knowledge of longevity and being able to know that you're going to be secure, or
Correct.
was there something more to what those guys were doing that you said, I think I want to do that?
Yeah, no, I think, I mean, there was some attraction with the Secret Service that financial crimes investigations, which again I began to enjoy doing, and kind of matching wits with a more sophisticated criminal. And then they also had the travel opportunities as well, so that was attractive to me. And eventually they got the retirement system secured, and
Right.
Now they have the drop and all that. But at that time, I was just a little concerned about investing, another 10 years in there and not knowing what would happen. So,
Right.
So I applied and got accepted initially by ATF.
Did you just apply just blindly, or did you know anybody? Did you talk to anybody there, kind of get an idea of whether I want to do ATF or whether I want to do Secret Service or whatever the case is?
So I had known some with ATF, the local boss, who's a great guy, and I had talked to him in the past. When I was out on calls that we had to call ATF out on.
Oh, right.
And then the Secret Service I worked with a lot because I was a detective working financial crimes. So we had a lot of interaction with each other, and they were recruiting me very hard.
That's cool. I mean, the fact that somebody wants you, and I'm not just saying somebody wants you, but when a person sits there and people are saying, hey, you should consider us, here's my card, here's, give me a call, we can talk, let's go to lunch, whatever the case may be. That's kind of a nice feeling, thinking, wow, I have some value. I have some, I
never, until this conversation, I never really even thought about that, to be honest with you.
That's kind of funny.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how, maybe, I mean, I know people that think like that, I'm just doing my job. I'm just doing, and somebody sees what I'm doing, and
right.
They have an interest that they think I'm doing a good job. Well, okay, thank you. I appreciate that, but, so you chose the ATF. How long were you at Little Rock before you left?
10 years.
10 years. And then you go to the ATF and you figure, this is cool. I'm going to be here for the rest of my career and I will retire from here. Is that right?
Yeah, well, it wasn't.
I,
That was the opportunity to get into federal law enforcement.
Mhm.
Um, I didn't know. I went in with an open mind. I thought, earlier in my life, I looked at ATF as, hey, these are the door kickers, them and DEA, the door kickers of federal law enforcement.
Right.
Running and gunning, and that's what I was attracted to.
Hmm.
But now, I was a little bit older. I had gotten some of that out of my system, and my wife was now pregnant, and so I wasn't quite as interested in the door kicking as I had been earlier in my career.
Right.
But and then with ATF, I was initially, again, because of my financial crimes background, assigned to an arson group. So you're digging through fire scenes and, basically a firefighter with a gun,
Right.
and, when you finish up, you blow your nose and you've got soot in your nose. And,
Sure. Yeah.
it's a physical manual. I mean, it was very interesting to get into the fire scene and actually start to process it to see, hey, this is where, the pour patterns and the, where the origin of the fire took place and things of that nature. But, when the Secret Service called to say, hey, would you be interested?
Mhm.
I jumped at that opportunity to go back to them. And, and the other thing too was with ATF, I was in New Orleans. So that whole group landed up subsequently going out to Waco.
Oh,
And
really? Okay.
yeah,
Okay.
so, three of the four that were killed in Waco, I personally knew.
Really?
And yeah, and my group supervisor was one that was shot multiple times. The guy in Little Rock, the supervisor in Little Rock, who actually hired me,
Mhm.
he too was shot multiple times. And who knows whether I would have been there or been involved in that or not if I had stayed. But
Right. How long before Waco had you left?
Maybe 2 years, maybe.
Oh, wow. And that happened
Um,
in 93, correct? 92?
yes, because I went to the Secret Service in 1990.
Yeah. I remember seeing that. And when I was in school, when I was junior in high school, and we did that was just the news. That was what was on because of the standoff, the multiple day
Yeah.
standoff, and the whole thing. And now, and I understand. Was there things that could have been, and I'm going on Waco now, but were there things that we can, obviously there was things that we could learn, but was there things that we could have avoided from the beginning with that whole thing? Or was there things that, that didn't sit right with you as you were kind of seeing that unfold?
Yeah. So it's my understanding. So like Todd McKeon was a good friend of mine who was killed there. And he and I, we were like one class separated. We were at the Law Enforcement Training Academy together, and had gone to Mardi Gras together, and just a good guy. And I had seen him literally like the week before. He had just completed a trial, and he said, "Hey, listen, I'm going out to Texas on an op. When I get back, we'll have to have lunch." And I said, "Yeah." And of course, that never happened. But
Wow.
it's my understanding that that the undercover called and said, "Hey, we're blown." That that they know we're coming.
Oh, right.
And I think the bosses looked at it that, hey, if we cancel this now, that this is going to have blowback, that we've spent all this money, all this time on this. And and then in hindsight, then supposedly Koresh would actually leave the compound on a daily basis. And, there was people who said, hey, we could have grabbed him out and away from the compound.
Right.
And I know that, some of them had concerns about, that the op plan of driving in on these cattle
Oh yeah, the kettle trucks or whatever.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they had some problems that, they were coming in wide open and, turned into just, a horrendous gun battle. And
Was it one of those things that we're in motion, we can't stop this train, we just have to keep going?
And I think that's what it was.
Yeah.
And, sadly, like I said, the supervisor that made the decision to continue on, I hope he understands that, he cost the lives of some good, valuable people. And, it was just, a terrible decision to continue on after, again, the undercover called and said, hey, let's 1022 this is no good,
Right. And what was your friend's name again?
Todd McKeon.
Yeah.
And then Conway LeBlue was also in the office next to me. So
Conway,
yeah. LeBlue.
and I just want to write their names down so I know it, so I can I want to look into it, but we also want to honor these people. I mean, even though it's been 30 years or whatever, you still want to honor these people for who they were and the sacrifice they made for our country,
Right.
By trying to bring people that were, I firmly believe Koresh was a evil man,
Yes.
but who am I? I'm just a guy
Mhm.
who was a kid at the time, I guess. So anyways, going back to you, you were at the DEA, you say, I'm gonna go over to the Secret Service because of more of the
ATF.
financials, or I'm sorry, the ATF.
Yeah, that's right.
And so did you have you were at the ATF and then you said you wanted to go to Secret Service, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
And was it because you want to go deal with financial stuff? You like dealing with that?
I did. And then also, the travel as well. Because they did a fair amount of travel. So,
and your wife and you said she was pregnant before this. And so you obviously had children now.
Yeah.
And she was good just to towing along because she was able to
Yeah.
pretty much get into any hospital she needed to, right?
Correct. And, again, just a fabulous mother, always had that, maternal instinct and nurturing. And, so I knew that when I was gone, that she was going to fulfill my role and be both mother and father. And, if they got sick, that there was nobody better than her to take care of them.
Right. It's probably better than having you there, right?
Yeah. Again,
well, at least that's how I looked with my kids.
She was just very, resilient and independent. And, I remember one time, I had called from, I think I was in St. Louis, and I said, how's everything going? And she said, well, I think both of the girls have ear infections and the hot tub is leaking, And so I said, well, you know what to do with the girls, and call a plumber for the hot tub.
Right.
But this is a woman that was willing to, change out the garbage disposal.
Right.
And
she has no problem rolling those sleeves up, huh?
No, and so she was very skilled like that, and just a magnificent person.
That's cool. And it's hard to find people like that. And then the fact she's pro cop, she sees you as a regular patrolman doing your job, being a cop's wife, and then saying, hey, I want to go become federal. I'm going to go with these guys who kick doors in and walk and go into houses of people. And she's like, okay, sure, do what you do. And she trusted you to come home back to them on a nightly basis or daily basis.
Yeah, she did. She knew that, I was very proficient in officer safety, that, I tried not to take unnecessary chances, that, I was always, working with other people that were like-minded, and, that was instilled in us, again, and from work in the streets that, we're brothers and sisters, that you have to trust each other, on backup. And, when you get on that radio and yelling that you need help, that people are coming,
people are coming. Yeah. So you go through that, you go through all this different stuff, and you choose that you're going to now move over to the Secret Service. Was that difficult to do, or was that easier since you'd been in the ATF?
So what happened there was the first day I was being picked up to go to work at ATF. One of the agents that picked me up said, "Hey, I'm not going to be here long. I'm transferring over to the Secret Service." And I said, "Oh, it's funny you should say that. I had an application pending with the Secret Service, but I haven't been picked up yet." Mm-hmm. So we had stayed in touch, and then like I said, it was about a year later. He arranged for me to come in and meet the assistant boss of the field office there in New Orleans, mm-hmm. And so he said, "Who are you? I don't know anything about you." And, so I explained to him, my background. And then I had a Rolodex full of, contacts for credit card companies and bank investigators and all that. And I said, "I'm just sitting on the shelf. I've, just never been hired." Mm-hmm. And so he actually turned around right there and picked up the phone and called headquarters and said, "I have 2 openings. I've got this guy." And so and he hung up, and that was the type of guy he was, and yeah. So he turned around to me, he says, I'll give you a call and let you know." And I think it was like an hour later, I was at my desk, he called me and he says, "Okay, here's your 2 starting dates, pick one." And that was it. So
did you have to call your wife and say, "Hey, check this out, this has just happened, which one am I going to take?" Or did you kind of go over it with her and say, "We need to talk about this"?
So when he called, and she knew that that's where, I wanted, and I think she was good with that. I think she looked at the Secret Service as being a little bit safer than, being at ATF. So, okay, yeah. So I think she was on board with that.
Yeah, she liked you coming home. That's fine. Yeah. So you get into there, you get into the Secret Service, and immediately you were on the president's detail, correct?
No.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Immediately you were the guy that was running alongside the limo on a motorcade, correct?
Yeah, no, that didn't happen either. No.
So immediately you were so what was that? Obviously you went through training with the ATF and you got through all this different stuff. Did you have to do obviously different things with the Secret Service, but did you have to go through the basic, federal law enforcement school again or anything like that? Or
no, so I didn't have to do that, mm-hmm. But then I did have to go through their academy, which was outside of in Beltsville, Maryland is where it's located. Mm-hmm. So I did that.
And so that was easier, more difficult? Similar?
Yeah, maybe it was a little bit more challenging.
Okay.
Yeah, there was more, physical fitness involved, a lot more shooting involved. So at that time.
Yeah. Because the Secret Service, if I'm not mistaken, they were initially designed for money, for finance stuff,
correct,
for currency, right?
Yes, counterfeiting.
Uh-huh.
So
because all the states and everybody was just able to just make whatever at the time. Correct.
Yeah, I think they estimated that like a third of all currency in circulation at that time is counterfeit.
Mm-hmm. What year was this? 1800s?
1860. Yeah. So actually, the kind of the trivial question is that Abraham Lincoln, on his last day before he was assassinated, mm-hmm. signed the creation of the Secret Service, but it was to combat counterfeit currency, not for executive protection. And he was subsequently killed, assassinated. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't until, years later that we became involved with executive protection.
And so you guys are looking at all the finance stuff and then trying to catch counterfeiters and everything else like that initially.
Yes.
And at what point did the Secret Service kind of turn into a team that also does executive protection?
So it would have been after one of the assassinations of McKinley in the early 1900s.
Okay. and they said, hey, we've got this organization, they're doing nothing but trying to find counterfeiters, let's go ahead and
Right.
add a couple bodies to them, and then we'll
Sure.
have them branch off.
Yeah.
And so you get in and you're just doing financial stuff. Are you trying to find counterfeiters, or what was your forte?
So yeah, so initially I was assigned to the New Orleans field office. So when you're in the office, I was primarily working, at that time was credit card fraud and counterfeit. And then when the president would go out and travel, then you'd go out in support of that and work as what we refer to as a post stander. So you would go out and stand out on the perimeter, usually teamed up with, one of the local police department representatives, and, doing access control and that type of work.
Did, going into like with all the credit card fraud stuff, this is in the mid 90s, correct?
Yeah, or early 90s, yes.
Okay. And so it isn't what it is now. Obviously,
Right.
everything's electronic now. And back then we had those slider things when we would do
Yes.
a credit card transaction.
Yeah.
Right. And so what was the difference back then? I mean, obviously you weren't doing anything online. They didn't have an online back then. How were you able to start looking? And was it all just like localized, or did you start seeing patterns on some big grand federal level, or did people send things into you guys, or what was
well, both. I mean, sometimes you'd have, a local, you'd get calls from bank investigators, saying, hey, we've got, this fraud occurring. And then like there was one time I had a lady that called that said, hey, my elderly dad has had his, 2 of his credit cards compromised, and people are banging his credit cards. And, so then you do the investigation and you're going out try to identify who's using the credit card. And in that case, it turned out to be like the home health care nurse that was, right. Doing it.
So what would they do? Just get the number and then do mail order catalogs on the thing, or would they go?
So that was one of the things, and have deliveries made. And, like I remember one time there was a whole series of a credit card company called and said, hey, we're having all of these deliveries made to this house.
Mm-hmm.
And it's boxes of ammos, sniper scopes, all kinds. So it was like becoming kind of concerning, this is bad juju here. So,
right.
And found out that it was an abandoned house that it was being dropped off at.
Okay, that's a clue. That's
a
serious
so
red
then
flag,
you knew.
yeah.
So, and actually, and going back to the old days, I went to the Crisscross book, which had the listing of all the houses on that street. Uh-huh. And I was going down, and I recognized that there was a New Orleans police officer who had who lived on that street. So I thought, let me give him a call, because he'll know, if there's any shenanigans going on, who might be behind it.
Right.
So I called him, and he said, hey, give me a few minutes, I'll give you a call back. Mm-hmm. And he did. And he said, I found out who it was. I said, really? That was pretty quick. He says, yeah, it's my son.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. And so anyway, we were able to go to the U.S. Attorney's office and say, hey, he's never been in trouble before. He's looking to go into the military, and
was he just he liked the stuff. He didn't have any ill intent. He was just
no. He was just looking to go out to the range and bust caps and
right.
And in that instance, the way they compromised was they were shoulder surfing somebody that was using a credit card.
Mm. But he was sending it to this
station.
He was sending it to this vacant house.
Yes.
So his dad wouldn't find out.
Right.
His dad's a cop. Oh, that's hilarious. So anyways, you were saying that the gas station attendant stuff, you were saying.
Yeah. So, I mean, it was just somebody using their credit card at the gas station, and somebody just what we refer to as shoulder surfing. They looking over the top and getting the credit card number and expiration date and all of that. So again, that's going way back. And then, the counterfeiting, we had some of those cases going as well.
Yeah. And that was the majority of it. So it's not so much counterfeit as much as it was, I'm assuming way more credit card fraud going on, way more.
Yeah. So at that time it was, we had a couple of counterfeit cases. In fact, there was one where it was DEA came to us and said, hey, we have an informant that's into a crew that's counterfeiting. And as it turned out, it was a crew that had previously been involved in counterfeiting. But, we did surveillance on them, and we followed them to this house, and we went into the executed a search warrant on the house, and he had laid all the counterfeit. It was about $100,000. He had laid it out on the bed, and his girlfriend was in the bathroom, and what he was expecting. So if we had waited about 15 minutes more, things would have been dramatically different, because he was expecting to get her out of the bathroom and then have her lay on top of the money and, getting frisky with her.
Right.
And so we arrested him before all that took place. And then his defense attorney told us in court, said, well, you understand that there was no intent to defraud. This was purely a sexual aid device, and no different than a vibrator. I said, well, stick with that.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so funny. Because now we get these counterfeit stuff, cases all the time, and we send it off to the Secret Service and whatever. Right. But a lot of what people are doing now with counterfeit stuff is they're ordering on Amazon bills that look from a distance, look real, and on it it'll say motion picture money. Yes. For use in movies, or it'll have some Chinese like characters. Yes. On it in like the reflective thing. And when you look at that from a distance, or if you don't know, if you're not paying attention, you're a gas station attendant, or you work the midnight shift at 7-Eleven or something like that, and somebody gives you $100 bill and you make the change and they get out of here before you get a chance to look at it. We get a lot of those, but the fact that somebody has that stuff is not illegal. The fact that somebody has those things on their possession is not legal. It's when they try to actually,
pass it. Right.
But back then you said just having that stuff was.
Well, so the difference being is, for example, we refer to like a one-note pass. Uh-huh. So, somebody that has, and sometimes, you've gone to a store, you've cashed maybe, $100 bill, and you get back, a counterfeit 20
right.
in change, and you don't know. Mm-hmm. And then you go to a store and then try to pass that. Mm-hmm. Perhaps you've now identified, hey, I need to get rid of this money, or you have no idea, in which case, there's no intent. So what we would always have to do is look at it and say, okay, can we identify them doing more passes than just that? And how much do they have on their pocket? Do they have, like one pocket is filled with counterfeit and one pocket is filled with the good money where they've exchanged it?
Right. They obviously have it separated. They obviously know what's what. Okay.
Yeah.
So he obviously, this guy that you guys totally ruined his day.
Yes.
By arresting him, yes. Taking away his opportunity to, as you say, get frisky, probably for several years. This guy, he has that money. You were able to determine that he knew what he was doing. This intent of having this money in this manner.
Right. And the other aspect to that is we knew that they were actually printing money.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So that changes the complexion of it as well.
Sure.
Where like today, now people can just, that they're scanning and printing off of their, laptop computers, mm-hmm. and they no longer need an offset printing press.
Right. Yeah. I guess back then you had to have an operation.
Yeah.
Now you can go down to, Staples or Office Depot, and you can get everything you need for $500.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
Like we arrested an individual over in Mississippi one time that had purchased a printing press, offset printing press, and he had it in his bedroom. And he had rented To Live and Die in LA, which was a movie back,
Right.
not a very good movie, but it had a good scene in there on how to counterfeit.
Uh-huh.
And so he had rented that from, Blockbuster back in the day and just didn't return it. But he was watching that over and over and taking notes on how to counterfeit.
Oh,
and
really?
It was actually pretty successful. Yeah.
Wow. And were you guys able to catch him because of the Blockbuster renting?
No.
Oh,
Yeah.
I was going to think, oh, that would be, we got him because of,
yeah.
I forgot.
So, I mean,
his
it's
rental
kind of like
fees.
drug dealers, where that they're stepping on the product. So, he had, I forget how much money he had printed, but then he's trying to sell packages then to other people to have them go out and distribute it. And that's how it was actually, I think it was the FBI that actually came to us initially on that. And so they had an informant that said somebody was trying to pass counterfeit to them.
That's pretty cool. So you spend your time doing this, and you said you got to travel a lot.
Yes.
To this, was that for investigations? You start realizing, okay, somebody's doing this here. We need to go over there because I think you have lead, or was it?
No, so it was all, so it was all protection related, going out in support of, the presidential travel, vice presidential travel, or foreign dignitaries. Every year, September, you're going up to the United Nations General Assembly. You've got, dozens or hundreds of foreign dignitaries coming into town. And so you're dealing with all that.
And so you got to do that, I guess, often enough.
Yes.
And did it you look at it like, September's here. I'm in the middle of a good case and I'm getting ready to crack this, but I've got to put this on pause for a little bit to go to.
Yeah, and in fact, I remember one time actually, doing some undercover phone calls, from like a pay booth, up in Washington, D.C., where I was carrying on conversations with a bad guy up in Canada to try to keep the deal going. And I thought, this is kind of ridiculous. Here I am, trying to keep that going while also doing, protection on some foreign dignitary as well.
Right. Yeah. I can imagine, you're just getting so far, like I'm making some headway on this one. I'm really getting ready to close. And then, but we got to go up and protect the president of Timbuktu or whatever. And I don't know if you ever protected the president of Timbuktu, but
no, that's one I can actually say I never did.
Do you ever meet some high, I guess, world renowned dignitaries in doing that?
I guarded, various, presidents or prime ministers of, various countries. And
did you ever get to converse with them or anything like that? Or was it just, I'm here, I'm watching the door, and then we'll.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, it wasn't like a whole lot of, conversation. Sometimes, they'd ask you or say hello to you or, something like that. But, not a whole lot of, deep conversations occurring.
I see. Yeah. And I wouldn't think there'd be deep conversations, but enough that you can, in the movies, they say anybody in the Secret Service, they meet them and they have a relationship with this person. They know them, they're friends, they know them by first name and all this different stuff. You've seen all those, I don't know, what is that, Gerard Butler movie, Olympus Has Fallen or whatever, stuff like that. It's like he knows the president on first name basis, they're best friends or whatever.
Yeah. So, and if you're assigned to, a permanent detail, so on, say that the president's detail,
right,
the primary detail leader who's with him day in and day out, that they obviously develop, a relationship.
Yeah.
And I would say that for the most part, it's, a professional relationship. They're not hanging out, playing Yahtzee on the side. Or,
right. Right. So I guess going back to you get a lot of time with the Secret Service, and how long were you with them?
So I did 22 years. That the first go around, I left, I retired. I was out for 5 years, came back, and then did another 4 years with them.
Well, what made you come back?
It was just a good opportunity at that time that they were shorthanded, that they put up an announcement, said, hey, anybody that's retired that wants to come back, we'll take you back. And, I just happened to be in a perfect situation at that time to go back. Initially, they just said, hey, it may only be for a year or not even a full year. And, if I had had like a full-time job that I was reporting to, I couldn't have done that, but I was, teaching and doing freelance stuff. So I was able to return, and it turned out that it went beyond the 1 year and turned into 4 years, and actually could have gone longer. And I just decided, enough is enough.
Right. That's cool. And so you did that. You gone back, you retired, you say, hey, I'm going to just golf, or I'm going to do whatever. And then you go back for 4 years, and then you retire again.
Right.
And you said, so were you said, reading your bio that I talked about before, you're an adjunct professor or instructor, right?
Right.
And did that come about when you were during your 5 years off, or after your second 4 years?
Yeah. So it was during that 5 years. So, and the one thing I think, we should discuss is that, when you're coming up on retirement, I mean, we're in a profession that we often, we almost wish our lives away. We're always sitting there saying, well, I've got, 10 years to go. I've got 5 years to go. And,
Right.
So you're always in that countdown, and, it's kind of a bad way to look at life,
Yeah.
Wishing your life away essentially. But, so once I reached the 20 years, I was like, whew, I made it,
Right.
And, at one point, so there was, when I was on the police department, there was a guy I worked with, and we were detectives, and the way we would work in financial crimes, we were always 9 to 5, and you would have rotating shifts where you would work a 5 p.m. to 1 a.m. shift, to do evening coverage. And but he would always come in like at straight up 9 o'clock as the second hand was sweeping across the 12. And
Wow.
he, and I thought, he must be standing out in the hallway just waiting. And he'd come in and he'd pull off his gun and drop it into the top drawer. And then he'd pull out his pen and scratch through the calendar another day and say, I hate this effing place. And then he'd squirt down his phone and then go to work. And I thought, man, what a miserable way to live, that,
Right.
You hate coming in here every day. Right. And, I think he also had, maybe things weren't so honky-dory at home either, but I always thought, man, if I get like that, I'd want to find a different job,
Right.
So, so now fast forward when I've got, I've got 22 years in, let's just say the supervisors that I had at the time were not very engaged in, positive aspects to encouraging a good workplace. And so there's a group of us every year that we would get together, and we'd go to a spring baseball game, we'd go out to dinner, and just socializing. It's about 25 to 30 of us. And, I came home after that and told my wife, I said, I've just come to the realization that, I was having fun, I was laughing and all that, but I think that has left me, and I'm no longer laughing and having a good time in life. And, I talked it over with her, and I said, I think this is it. I think it's time to go before I become like that guy, and before I become too miserable and, start hating it. So, I made the announcement that I was leaving in, 2 months, and I think it caught everybody by surprise. And, I essentially jumped without a parachute. I really didn't have any plans, which I would strongly recommend against doing.
Right. Sure.
But, when I landed, then, shortly thereafter, I got a call from a friend of mine who was a professor at St. Leo, Barry Glover, who is retired from one of the local police departments, was a great guy, very proactive in law enforcement training, and called me and he says, "Hey, you've taught for us before, I'd love to have you on board, teaching a class on conducting threat assessments." And so I did. And as part of that, then I wrote the book. And then sadly, Barry died prematurely. And as most adjuncts, I was kind of tossed off the caboose like an old Samsonite,
Yeah, because you weren't friends with the person that took his place.
Correct. Right. Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. So, and they said, "Hey, we'll honor the classes that are scheduled, but after that, see you later." So,
Right.
And then lo and behold, I got a phone call from Steve Gottlieb, who owned the Alpha Group that specializes in law enforcement training and especially geared towards analysts.
Mm-hmm.
And he initially said, "Hey, I saw that you have a lot of fraud background. Would you like to come on board and teach financial crimes?" And it was like, I'd rather stick a fork in my eye than, sit there teaching for a week, financial crimes, how
Right.
to look at,
Right.
Financial statements and all that. So
Yeah, RICO stuff. Yeah.
yeah. It just, I said, "Oh no, I've been to classes and, it's okay, but, there's no way I could teach that." So, but I told him I could teach this, threat assessments. And
Right.
so he said, he brought me on to do that. And then I did some other ad hoc work as well with some retired FBI agents.
Where did the threat assessment knowledge or I guess curriculum, where did that come in for you? Where did that get highlighted for you to say, "Hey, you know what? I teach this well and I know this well"? Was that just from years of experience, or had you done things specifically geared towards threat assessment? And then what exact threat assessment are we talking about?
So when I after New Orleans, I got transferred to Miami. I was working in Miami for 4 years.
Uh-huh.
And then I was transferred to Washington, and I was assigned to the Protective Intelligence Division. And, in the past, I go back to my patrol days. I never looked forward to dealing with somebody that had mental health issues, an emotionally disturbed person, or, whatever you want to refer to them as.
Right.
And it was like, "Oh no, not another one of these," But once I got to the intelligence division, then that's where you focus on looking out. You're kind of the first layer of security for the president or vice president, where you're going out and assessing individuals that come to your attention that could pose a threat.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was sent out to do an advance in Oregon, your home state.
Uh-huh.
And I was at initially in Portland. They sent me down to Eugene. And then, and actually what it was President Clinton wanted to go to Thurston High School.
Okay.
Where we had a school shooting.
Right.
So, I went out to the school, and, I was just looking out at this, smaller school, and looking at the cafeteria where the shooting had occurred, and,
Mm-hmm.
And then looking at these mountains that were in the background. And I thought, what would possess a kid growing up in this beautiful environment to go in there and execute his parents, and then go out to the school and start killing, his classmates.
Right.
And so it just really kind of intrigued me as to try to find out the why behind that, or why people do that. So,
right.
And the Secret Service was in 1998 stood up the National Threat Assessment Center, and that focused on conducting what we refer to as behavioral threat assessments of potential targeted violence. So school shooters and those that are looking to target, our protectees being, the president, vice president, and family members.
Right.
So that's how I got involved in that. And then when I left DC, I went to Tampa, and I was looking forward to going back to financial crimes again. And that started, and then September the 11th happened, and then that kind of changed the direction. And then I was right back into doing the intelligence again, and working with the FBI and JTTF, and so I would go out to local law enforcement agencies and teach threat assessments, and the school was aware of that, and that they brought me in for that purpose then.
And that's pretty cool. And were you were working for the Secret Service during 9/11, correct?
I was, yes.
Yeah. And was this during your post-retirement, or was it pre-first retirement?
Yeah, no, so it was pre-first. I was actually I was assigned to the Tampa field office, and we were actually in Sarasota on 9/11 with the president.
Yeah, because he was reading to some kiddos or something at a school in Florida,
yes.
right? Yeah.
Yes, yep. So I was assigned to essentially the radio operations room. We call it the security room at the school, and the military aide came in and asked about whether the TV had a recorder on it. And so when he came in, I knew that something was going on. And, so I asked him, I said, well, what's happening? He said, a plane just flew into the World Trade Center.
Yeah.
And, initially I thought, well, that happened after World War II. A plane flew into the Empire State Building. So I thought, that's what it was. And then once we got the TV on, then we saw the second plane hit, and then it became quite apparent that that was not going to be the case.
Right. Yeah. And I remember seeing that or hearing that. I was working, and so we had the radio on, and I remember hearing a plane hit the World Trade, and we're thinking, a friend of mine, he was a veteran also, and he's like, but somebody an idiot, and their Cessna flew too low or something like that,
Yes.
Why are they flying over New York? But then obviously, yeah, it was way worse than we thought, because there's no thought that somebody would do that. I mean, that's that's ridiculous.
Right.
But so you guys, obviously, the president gets out of there, you guys follow along, and you get him back up to Washington. Is that correct? And
yeah, so he flies out from there, and he flies to Barksdale Air Force Base, and then on to Washington eventually. But and then we stayed behind in Sarasota. One of those cases where an individual had been arrested the night before for being, public intoxication.
right.
And he was telling the police department that he thought something bad was going to happen to the president the next day. So now all of a sudden you sit there and say, well, what information did he know?
Right.
And so we pulled him out of jail and talked to him. And he said, yeah, I saw this guy that, was a bad guy that, had moved away. And then all of a sudden he just showed back up in town yesterday. And, he's of Middle Eastern descent, and he's hanging out with another group like that. So he told us where this guy was residing. So myself and another agent drove by that house. And sure enough, I saw, an individual walking into, it's kind of like what I would refer to as a duplex.
Right.
And so I went back to the officer, Sarasota officer, and I said, hey, if you don't mind, would you have another unit come meet us here? And we're going to go do a knock and talk.
Right.
And find out who these guys are, what they're up to. And, I'm not going to do any surveillance, and, we're just going to get to the root of it right now. And within 10 minutes, there was probably 20 officers there.
Yeah.
And Sarasota's a fairly small department. I don't know how many officers, maybe, 150, 200 officers maybe, but
Right.
so I think like the entire shift showed up, and probably the midnight shift as well. And so
Yeah. Yeah.
and so anyway, we got up there, and there was some things that really, raised concerns to us. Some flight manuals in there, and a whiteboard that had been, wiped clean. And
Mhm.
so, I mean, there were items of, real concern. So we worked that very late into that night. And then I continued doing that for the next several weeks, working on that, as well as working at the FBI command post before I went up to ground zero.
And so and you didn't obviously go to ground zero on the 11th, was it the 12th, 13th, 14th?
Yeah. So I went up there. It was it was about maybe the end of October, I think.
Oh, okay.
Is when I went up there.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And obviously cleanup was still happening, and construction was
yeah.
still going on, and everything was
Yes.
just still a crazy mess.
Yeah.
And
I mean, there were still girders being pulled out that were still red hot, cherry red.
wow,
Yeah.
geez, a month and a half later, and
Yes.
it's still that way.
Yeah.
And you went there. Why did you have to go there? I mean, obviously you wanted to. I'm assuming you wanted to kind of connect with the whole.
So I kind of volunteered to go to the UN.
Mhm.
And the boss misheard me when I said I wanted to go to New York up there. So he put me in for that assignment. And
Oh, okay.
So anyway, I went up there, and, I'm glad I did. It was an experience that, I'll never forget. But,
Right.
what had happened was our office was located in building number 7 of the World Trade Center complex, which had also collapsed.
Uh-huh.
So we were up there for that.
Yeah. I'd gone there, I don't know how many years ago, and I've got family that lives over there. And we went to there's a church right there next to ground zero, which I thought was, and it's an old church, been there since the Revolutionary War or before, and that didn't get touched. I mean, it's so close. It is so close to everything. It didn't. I think the only thing that it did was like one of the panes of glass cracked, something along those lines. And there's a whole graveyard outside this church, and that's just it's if you get a chance, if any people listening, you get a chance, go there. It's so honoring to anybody, and if I'm assuming you've been there since.
I have, yes.
Since then, since they've really done it up and honored all the names of the people that we lost during that time. And so that's I don't know. It's so
and it's just amazing, some of the things that you would find that survived. I remember like finding a sweater, for example, and I thought this belonged to some 20-year-old,
right,
that probably that morning, brushed her teeth, had a cup of coffee, headed out the door, thinking about happy hour and a date that evening, and having no idea that, she would ever go back into her apartment again. And, and then you would find, financial papers, but, like there was no furniture. Everything was just complete dust. And, and then, but you would find like clumps of hair sometimes, and, just kind of bizarre stuff.
That's so difficult,
Yeah.
Wow.
Bone fragments. I mean, a lot of bone fragments.
Wow. It's so, if you really think of it like that it wasn't just like bones disappeared. They were in a person at some point, and that
correct.
That person had to meet such a violent and powerful hit from the collapse of the buildings or those giant steel girders or whatever the case was. And, like you said, they had no idea. Their intent was just to work on their, go to work that day, or, they were hoping to, visit somebody that evening, or they were going to be going home, at the end of the day and go and see their dogs or whatever the case may be.
Right.
And they're humans, and we lost them, and it's because somebody decided, being evil and hating somebody because of where they live is more important than caring for other people, which is odd to me.
And I mean, it was a beautiful day in New York too. It was sunshiny and just a beautiful day. I remember talking to one of the supervisors up there, and he said, Mike, it was just a gorgeous September day here.
Yeah. So you get through this time, you go through this time where you're working these details, you're traveling all over, and you decide that you're going to retire. You get to go become an adjunct professor or teacher, instructor, teach about threat assessment and all that good stuff. And you said you wrote a book,
right?
And basically on threat assessment, correct?
Correct. Yes.
So, and what's the name of that book?
It is called Mass Killers: How You Can Identify Workplace, School, or Public Killers Before They Strike.
Mass Killers, written by Mike Roach. And am I saying that right? Your last name? Roach.
Mm-hmm.
You see, I need to ask these questions before we start. You're the second person I've done that with.
You're close enough. You were in the ballpark. You can call me anything but late for dinner, right?
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go. Hey, you fella. Yeah. So you write this book, and available on Amazon and everywhere else, I'm assuming?
Just Amazon. It's Amazon exclusive. Yep.
Oh, okay. And you can get this book, but it details it. It's a good, if your job is to be looking at keeping someplace safe, whether it's in a school or it's a dignitary protection or anything like that, this book will cover majority of those topics, correct?
Yeah. So it primarily focuses on what we refer to as behavioral threat assessments, where you're dealing with individuals that are displaying, concerning behaviors, and, how to actually assess those individuals and how to properly, interview them, conduct those investigations, and then to, try to mitigate these individuals who are going down what we refer to as the path of violence, and try to stop them from getting to that point.
Right. And have you gotten any feedback on this book as far as this is by people that have been able to use it and actually mitigate somebody from doing anything that they shouldn't be doing?
Yeah, so I've not heard anybody say, "Hey, listen, I used your book to actually, stop somebody from doing it."
Right.
I've had, good feedback. Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman read the book and said, "Hey, he called it a brilliant book, the best book he's read on the subject." And said, "Hey, I'd really like to write the foreword to your book if nobody has done that so far." So I was like, "Oh my gosh! I mean, what an honor!" I mean, I know you had him on on your show, but he's got celebrity status.
Yeah, and he knows his topic too.
Yes.
He doesn't talk out of the side of his mouth. He knows exactly what he's talking about, and it makes sense.
Yes.
And it's all usable, and that's got to be a pretty big honor to sit there and he reached out to you and said, "Hey, I'd like to do this. This would be cool."
Yeah, I had met him at I had been speaking at a homicide conference in Orlando, and so I had reached out to him and I said, "Hey, would you mind, taking a look at this and perhaps, providing me a blurb,
Right.
So then he came back, and I think that the blurb he wrote was brilliant. The single best book ever written on this essential subject was the initial blurb. And
yeah.
I was like, wow.
That's better than, hey, that's pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
It's better than I've seen better, but not many,
Right. Yeah. No, I was
that's floored. Yeah,
And then,
that's
like I said, then he wrote a very lengthy foreword. It wasn't just like a page or two. It was, a
right.
very lengthy foreword that he put into the book.
That's awesome. That is really cool. And so you get the book written during your retirement time, correct?
Yes.
And you are now fully retired and enjoying life every minute of the day.
So let's back up a little bit. So
Okay.
during the first period of retirement, I wrote the book, the first
Okay.
edition of the book. Okay. And then I was also working at as a peer support in a PTSD retreat as well in
Okay.
residence program. And then I wrote the second edition of the book. I completed that when I retired again last August.
Okay.
So the second edition is the one where Dave Grossman reviewed the book, and it's gone out since then.
And did you add more things to it to where you had done some more research, or did you say, you know what, I should have put that in there in the first one, and so I needed to
both.
Yeah.
There was more research had been conducted by various individuals. And people finally started taking notice that with mass killings, that we probably need to start looking at some commonalities and how
Right.
to
Yeah.
how to stop it. So so we had that, and obviously there's more incidents that have occurred, like Parkland, for example, had
Right.
occurred, and many others.
Yeah, you got the Parkland, you've got Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, you've got Uvalde, you've got this new one that happened in Chicago or Illinois
Right.
last week.
Yeah. Mhm.
And then the other ones that are just popping up. Is your assessment of this, is this the thing that you think that we might have an issue because guns are so easily accessible, or are we dealing with people? Because are people the problem?
So I believe people are the problem.
Right.
Obviously, the acquisition of firearms is the most efficient means of providing lethality to the situation.
Right.
I can't argue that.
Correct.
But I always sit there and say, hey, if you take away their guns, most people have the keys to a 2,000 or 3,000 pound weapon parked in the driveway.
All right.
And they can use that and have used that. We've seen that happen,
That
a
one in
number
Wisconsin.
of times.
Yeah, just not too long
At
ago.
the Christmas parade, absolutely.
Yeah.
And in Times Square, and then there was, another individual after Uvalde went out to, I think it was Santa Clara, California. It was somewhere in California anyway. And an individual showed up, didn't have a gun, but he had a knife, and tried to get admission into the school. They denied him.
Yes, I remember.
And then he ran his
Yeah.
car into a couple of other cars, and fortunately nobody was killed. And I think he tried to do a self-inflicted suicide with the knife, which is a hard way to go out. But and then he had some Molotov cocktails in his car as well. So
so in your I guess assertion is we're dealing with people who we need to be able to see people. We need to be able to see these issues that they're dealing with, and then being able to come alongside them. Like you said, you were a peer support for people who are struggling. We need to be able to come alongside them and help these people and deal with them that way. It's not just taking the toys away. It's not taking the tools away. It's actually changing their behavior to where they don't want to hurt people anymore. And seeing that and being that person that can help out.
Yeah, and what I refer to as providing them an exit ramp off of that pathway.
Right.
And,
yes.
Whether it's engaging social services to take a look at the home environment, because a lot of them do have some high dysfunctionality at home, especially for the adolescents. And then even the adult ones, you're looking at somebody, for example, what I refer to as being caught in the emotional negative vortex. So like for an adult, they would sit there and, perhaps they've lost their job, they're filing for bankruptcy, foreclosure on their home. Their wife has left them. The car has just been towed from the driveway and their goldfish has died. I mean, it's just like
Right.
one thing on top of the other.
Yeah.
And, that you need to try to find some way to provide some sort of support, some counseling to them to mitigate them going down that, getting so frustrated. And a lot of these start off more suicidal, and that homicide is like the secondary motivation behind it. It's to take as many bodies as they can to try to gain some fame. But suicide is the primary motivation quite often.
Right. Because I guess they're looking at, if they take people with them, other people have no other choice but to put them down or take them. So they don't have to do anything to hurt themselves. They don't want to hurt themselves. They don't like the pain or whatever.
Right. And I mean, and a lot of them do land up, once the police are 1097 there on the scene, that a lot of times that they land up committing suicide, right then, and that they realize, hey, that the gig is up, and
Right.
That they'll kill themselves. But a lot of them are trying to achieve a level of fame that they're trying to, out Columbine, so to speak,
Right.
and have a higher body count, because they know, hey, I'm going to have a designated Wikipedia page to my name and to the event, and and all of that, which is kind of sad. But
Right. That they're not going to get anything other than their name notoriety. And
right,
these
but for
poor
them,
people,
that's for a lot of them, I mean, they're living pretty meaningless lives. I mean, that they're for the most part losers in life.
Right.
They certainly perceive that, and for them, this is a way of sitting there putting an exclamation mark next to their name and telling people, hey, you're not going to forget me. I'm making you regret rejecting me, whether it was in school or firing me from work or society as a whole.
Yeah. It's frustrating. And I would think that it's a lot of it is social media, is what they see everybody else doing, and they see all these different things, and I want to be relevant too. But I think somewhere along the line we missed the part where we failed to teach them that character is your ultimate goal. You develop your character, become somebody better, as opposed to your inside character, internal character, not your outside, what you're seeing. And I think that's where we get a lot of this is my own personal opinion, but this is where I think we get a lot of the colored hair and the multiple piercings and the tattoos. Everybody just wants to pile on something else to hide themselves or to show whatever, so they can get attention that way, as opposed to just having a solid character and going out and being good for somebody else because it's the right thing to do. And then if you're going to get notoriety being like look at Mother Teresa. She didn't do any of that other than because she cared about people. She got some notoriety long before social media was a thing.
Yes.
So if you want notoriety, do it a positive way, do it in a good way. But I think we fail a lot, and myself included, when we don't teach kids that it comes from the inside and who you really are, and not what you're portrayed as or what you show on the outside. And I think we have people that act up because they're hurting on the inside, and they don't think about how they're hurting is hurting other people.
No, and I agree with you. I think a lot of them, and it's just like anybody that's contemplating suicide, for example. You become very inward thinking. You're not thinking of, hey, if I commit suicide, who is that going to impact? My family, my friends, that they don't always consider that. And because they're only dealing with the depth of their own darkness, of what they're having to deal with, those demons.
Right.
And, so that's why it's so important sometimes to reach out with a caring hand. And like you said in the beginning, treating people with respect.
Right.
And, and providing them an outlet, where they can moderate their behavior. And unfortunately in social media, like, for example, the Buffalo shooter, said that he basically became radicalized during COVID because, and this is
Yeah, I heard
where,
that. Yeah.
the parents sit there and say, hey, he's upstairs in his bedroom. How much trouble could he be getting into? And he's living online and there's no moderation of behavior. It's kind of a silo effect of these
Right.
individuals all espousing the same hatred. And, I remember one time talking to an adolescent that was being raised by his grandparents, and that they were wonderful people. They had a nice home. I remember seeing the church bulletin there, so I knew that they were going to church every week.
Oh, right.
And but they just figured, hey, their grandson is upstairs in his bedroom. How much trouble could he be getting into? Well, he had blackened out windows. He had the diagram of the school, and he was assembling suppressors or silencers for his gun and firing them into telephone books in the bedroom. And grandma and grandpa had no idea that that's what he was doing, because they
Wow.
assumed he was, not getting into any trouble as
He's
long
not-
as he was under their roof.
Yeah, he's not out getting into any trouble. What can he be
Right.
doing in the bedroom? But
Right.
he's having ammunition or whatever shipped to some vacant house down the street, and then he's taking it home. Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Right. Yes.
We had a kid similar to that, and he'd gotten all these different things. He had ordered a ton of different stuff. He had flak vests. He had ammo. He had guns, and he was like 15, something like that. And his sister was, he was mentioning all these different things. His sister was older. She was married and moved out and everything. And so, but she had gone home and she had come back and said something to one of our officers off duty, knew him off duty, and said, hey, my brother's doing this. He's collecting all these things. And he says he hates his school. And he says, I think he's going to be a school shooter. And so that guy, he says, okay, well, thanks for the information. Takes it to work, takes his information, and they're like, let's look into this. So they go looking into it, and sure enough, he had all this ammo. His whole intent was, he knew that one day it was just coming to a point where he was going to have a shootout with the police. He would put rifle plates in his notebook, all this, that he would carry around the school. And then, so at least that was the rumor. They go to school, they catch him at school wearing all camo, and sure enough, he's got the rifle plates in his notebook. He had diagrams, he had maps of the school, he had the whole thing. And when they got shared with the FBI, they're like, this is the number one thing we're dealing with right now. Yeah. They come to some podunk little town and deal with that. And so when you deal with that sort of thing, when you start seeing that, this is what kind of damage, and they had gone back during the investigation, they had asked the mom, how come you let him have the stuff? She goes, oh, he's just a kid, he's not going to do anything with it. But I don't see what the issue is. He likes that stuff. It's not playing with GI Joe anymore. There's a total different mindset when you have diagrams and you have ammunition and you have holsters and real guns at 15 years old. That's a different story.
No, and props to your department for drilling down and getting to the root of it and stopping him and providing him an out before he goes out and lands up spending the rest of his life in jail or dead and killing countless others. And like in Parkland, for example, there was 43 calls of to service to his residence, and 21 directly involved him. And now
Parkland, is that the Marjorie Stone Douglas?
Yes, it is. Yes.
School. Okay.
Yes. So and you go through and you read the reports, and some of them we're not adequately handled, but you can always sit there and say, well, there were calls in queue. The sergeant, lieutenant are telling you, hey, hurry up, get 10-8. We've got some more calls here. So, how much time can you really spend on some of these individuals that are pretty damaged? Yeah. And, in that instance, I would have said, hey, I understand that you have limited time to deal with this, but it would have been nice to refer that over to the threat management unit of the sheriff's department. The only thing was the sheriff's department didn't have such a unit. Right. So, nothing was really coordinated. The dots weren't connected. And, sadly, a lot of people died as a result.
Yeah. And unfortunate too. It's so horrible. So getting that book would be beneficial. I think I'm putting it on my list to go grab today. I'm going to get that ordered because I'm absolutely interested in reading that whole thing. That sounds fantastic. So,
and it even, I look at even like the patrol officer who gets it, that sits there, and because we really never got, we see, maybe if you're involved with, you've received a CIT training, but for the most part, if you have to keep in mind, 75% of the police departments across the country are 25 officers or less. So you don't have all the resources and training available.
Right.
So, for me, if, an officer reads this book and has to deal with somebody and says, hey, wait a second, that old Secret Service agent that wrote that book, he talked about this,
right.
And, brings it to the attention of, his supervisors, and, perhaps they take it seriously, and, you look at averting a Uvalde or, something along those lines, then it's success.
He could be his own department's threat management department. A single officer can be that threat manager.
Sure.
So he
starts with one.
Exactly. He can start becoming that one that people are calling. Hey, we've got this. Yeah, that's an issue because I remember in the book it said this or whatever. I've done a ton of research because it just lights that fire, which would be awesome. That'd be really good. So what are you doing now, Mike? What's the just golfing? Laying by the beach.
Yeah, no, I wish. So, doing podcasts, and continuing to write. I always tell people that are, approaching retirement that, you have to keep in mind that once you make that announcement that you're going, is that, that the vultures kind of start circling around overhead, like they're getting ready to start picking at the carcass, so to speak. And, gee, what kind of chair does he have? Oh, he left a stapler. And more importantly, what kind of car was he driving?
Right.
And, I'd like to get his car. And, so once you're out the door, there's just the phone calls, as expected, will start to decrease. And, I always tell people, hey, I applaud your safe arrival across the finish line. And the only people that are going to be at the finish line is your family and how you've treated them, the previous 20 or 25 years, however long. And they're the ones that you're going to spend the rest of your life with. And it's important to always maintain that throughout your career. And, so often, I've seen people that land up getting to the end and they don't have anybody waiting for them. And, that's kind of the sad tragedy.
They burned some bridges. They burned so many bridges along the way. Even their kids are not wanting to do anything with them.
Yeah. And, you can sit there and say, well, I plan to go out and go travel. And, that's all well and good until now, we're paying, $5 and $6 a gallon for gas, and, airplane tickets are now, $600. So, that kind of goes out the window. And, everything else you do is expensive as far as, golf or fishing and everything else. So you have to have a plan, though. You have to have something that's going to give you a reason to get out of bed each day.
Right.
And, for me, it's, I do writing, but, and try to get my workouts in and, spend time with my wife who, I'm very blessed that she is truly my best friend. We enjoy, last year we had gone out to Yellowstone and, took this long, trip. And I think, we covered, 2,500 miles in 7 days. And,
Wow.
And as somebody said, you were in the car for 7 days with your wife, And I said, yeah, because, she truly is somebody I want
Yeah.
to be with. I mean,
Yeah.
she's my best friend. I've been blessed in that department, and I know not everybody else is.
Yeah.
But
if you have it, and
yeah,
I know.
so I just always placed, a lot of importance on that, and
That's
being
cool.
a good father and being a good husband.
Yeah. Because you want to leave, like we said, leave that legacy.
Yeah,
We're
the legacy. Yep.
Yeah,
absolutely.
You want to say who, man, I totally, I miss that person being here. So yeah. And like you said before, looking at that whole idea of don't just count it down, live your life now, live it where you're at. Don't just count down, hey, I've got so many days till retirement. I'm out of here in 26 years and 3 months and 4 days. Wow. You're starting early on that one, aren't you?
But I will say I was guilty of that. I always had a calendar that kept track, in my phone, and I can't tell you how many times that changed, well, I'm going to stay for another year. I'm going to stay another 2 years.
Oh, yeah.
So,
well, I want to thank you for coming on. This is I know you think that you're not a hero or whatever, but you know what? Spending your life giving to other people, focusing on that, and then trying to maintain some sense of normalcy in your own life for your kids and stuff like that. I'll bet your kids look at you as a hero. I'll bet you those people who you found, the person that was trying to, extort their credit card or doing whatever, that you saved their life savings, or, those people who, that they were happy with you in their life, like Todd McKeon or Conway LeBlue. Those guys, they knew you, and they probably valued your friendship with them. And so that's the sort of thing that makes a person a hero, people that are willing to invest in other people. And I think you have explained that quite well, that you have done that with your life. And I think that's fantastic.
Thank you.
So really quick, how can people find you? How can they find out more about you or Mass Killer or anything like that? Where can they find information about Mike Roach?
So I have a website, mikeroach.com. It's ROCHE. And you can find that, like I said, just mikeroach.com. And then my books are all available on Amazon. I've got a couple of fiction books as well that, I enjoy writing that as well.
It's awesome. That's awesome. And are you on the social medias? On the interwebs?
Yeah. So I don't do a whole lot anymore on, Twitter or Facebook, but I am on LinkedIn. So you can find me hanging out in LinkedIn, and that's how we connected. And I've found that, very good in the past for making the connections and networking with like-minded individuals. And it's not the cesspool that some of the other places are.
I don't see too many people twerking or wearing bikinis and stuff on LinkedIn, which is which is probably good, since that's mostly what's it called? It's a platform for, finding professionals, finding new jobs, finding careers, finding people who are like-minded, and networking. It's not so much for shaking your tail feathers and stuff like that. So
now, I will say with Facebook, there's certain groups that I belong to that, are beneficial. And I belong to one from, from the Little Rock Police Department that, it's, that the old cops are in there, and you can keep track of each other, and, sadly, who has died, and, who's going through some bad situations. But, it's a way to stay connected. And, even though, I've been gone from there for 25 years or 35 years, whatever it is now. I've lost track. Like I told, I'm terrible at math,
Yeah.
but they, we're still, brothers and sisters, and
Right.
that love is still there.
Right. And that's cool. That's good to have that, because I think that's what it is. I heard a guy yesterday say that he was a football coach, and so this is where his mindset was, but he says you travel with friends, but you go to war with teammates. And I almost did agree with that. I think you go to war, you go to battle with brothers and sisters. I don't think a team, yeah, you can be a team with that, but I think you do it with brothers and sisters, because you need to have them, and they know they need to have you watching their back.
Yeah.
And vice versa. So it's important. And so that's awesome. That's good to know. That's cool to have that, because I think that we don't give that enough credit. Because we didn't have that years ago. And, we talked about that earlier, just not having the internet. You didn't have that ability to be able to do that stuff. So those guys, they just died alone, maybe because they hadn't talked to anybody forever.
Correct. Yeah, no, it's true. And that's a very good point. Yeah.
So, well, if you want to get a hold of you, Mike, or anybody listening wants to get a hold of the What's a Hero podcast, we're on all the social media platforms. You find us on LinkedIn and Twitter and Instagram and Facebook and everything else like that. You find us at the What's a Hero podcast.buzzsprout.com, where we have all of our prior episodes and links to your favorite podcast platform that you can download the episodes, which helps us and is actually good. So go subscribe when you get to those platforms. It's really good for you. And if you don't think it's good for you, try it. Give it at least a year, because that's how long it takes to really soak up everything that's good about the show. And then you'll be listening to the whole thing before you know it. And you'll say, hey, Ken, when you get more episodes? Well, every Monday. We'll try to get more episodes every Monday and have cool guys with tons of good stories like Mike here. And we'll be able to help you out. So, Mike, do you have any words of wisdom, things you want to leave with these people that they can use on their daily or just with their life? Were they anything positive that you can leave with them?
So I would say, first of all, you've got an awesome podcast, and I am a subscriber.
Oh,
so,
thank you. That's
yeah.
Cool.
So I've listened to, perhaps not all of them, but a good portion of the podcasts out there. When I'm working out, I used to listen to podcasts when I was, driving to work, but now I drive to my garage to the gym now. So, that aside, I just, say, hey, embrace life, have some laughs along the way. I mean, you have to keep it light. Sometimes we don't, and like I said, I recognized during that one period of time that I had lost the laughter in my life. So, embrace life and, love your family, and know that, when you reach that final, retirement, the finish line, so to speak, that it's the family that's going to be there to greet you. And hopefully it's with open arms and they're clapping with joy. And, there was something I used to keep on my, I still have it on my desk here. It's called Priorities. 100 years from now, it will not matter what my bank account was, the sort of house I lived in, or the kind of car I drove, but the world may be different because I was important in the life of a child.
That's right. Right.
So I always, and I had a picture of my children in that, and I've just always held that dear, that it doesn't matter how many arrests you've made or how many seizures you made or what rank you made. It's, what your children think of you now.
Right. What kind of person you were, and what's that legacy you're leaving. So that's awesome.
Yep.
So, Mike, like I said, thank you so much for coming on. It's been absolute pleasure and an honor to have you on. And I was just riveted by some of the stories you're telling. And I can just like, man, this is good stuff. And I think it's fantastic. So thank you. Keep up the good work. And I'm looking forward to getting your book, and then any subsequent books you come out with, that would be awesome to get a hold of. And I think I'm going to be sharing a lot of information based off of your books with some folks.
Okay.
So that's cool.
Ken, thank you very much. It was an honor, and again, humbled by your invitation.
Absolutely. You're more than welcome. Welcome back anytime as well. So I also want to thank everybody that keeps our country safe, and the ability for us to be who we are from our first responders, our police officers, our firefighters, our those in the alphabet soup world, such as the FBI, DEA, ATF, Secret Service. You guys, thank you so much for everything you do, and our veterans. We wouldn't honestly be able to have the country we have without you guys. So thank you. And to our nurses and teachers and dispatchers, you guys, and not to say that you guys are some side branch or something, you do as much as anybody else, if not more sometimes. So thank you so very much for what you do. But for Mike Roach, I've been Ken Frownfelter, and this has been the What's a Hero podcast. We are clear.